Hello, and thank you for watching this video on creating a new scheme of learning for an all-through school. As a new middle leader, I found the task a really daunting one that's been very enjoyable so far. This will be aimed at new middle leaders, but will also include a lot of information on how me and my school have looked at something as big as a 5 key stage intertwined learning package for science. I started at an inner city school in Birmingham with 4 other NQTs in 2015. I began teaching when the curriculum changes were introduced by Michael Gove, and the tides of change to a curriculum that was focused on knowledge-rich and long-term retention meant that we had to focus on how to engage our students in a way that allowed them to regularly review the content that had been covered. We were lucky as we were essentially starting from scratch with building a scheme of work. It was an incredibly hard yet rewarding journey as we were able to incorporate our new resources into our current teaching. Within 2 years, we had raised attainment from about 19% A star to C to just shy of 50% in science by changing our approaches to the lesson planning that we were doing. I trained in physics and found that for the first 2 years as a teacher, that was the only physicist within a school. When building lessons to challenge and cover the fundamentals, I didn't have a huge community to turn to, and so started to share resources on TES, and in year 3 of teaching became associated with the Institute of Physics and did some coaching work looking at increasing the engagement with girls within physics. Until recently, I was a TES author and a future physics leader coach for the IOP, but wanted to focus my energy on my new role at my latest school. As part of the first thing that you do before getting stuck into a big task like this, you really need to think about your philosophy on education and what you like to include within it. I like to think that science is a little bit about building integrity and noticing bias so that when students do leave school, they're able to make up their own mind of whether something is right or wrong. Now, remember to think about what you don't stand for as well as what you do stand for. This will allow you to see where things might be going wrong before it's too late and hopefully keep you and your team more on track. As you're likely to be leading the development of your department and colleagues, it'll be a really good reflection on you by including these pointers, and it'll be a reflection on your department overall of what they stand for to make sure that you create something that is incredibly unique to you, your team and your department. Now, there's a whole host of people out there that really want to help. Primary science resources being produced, retrieval reloads being reduced, booklets being reduced from year 1 through to year 6. I saw that this was started by Louise Cass and Mr. Baden through Twitter. It was initially started to help improve the level of science teaching in primary schools because there is a lack of specialists in science in primary. Adam Boxer has also done a lot of work on curriculum as well, and I've read his blogs over time, picking up ideas from the curriculum and development. And recently I've been following closely the rise of the hashtag of CogSci-Sci and the New Oak Academy, which recently opened online. National curriculum documents are massively overlooked in a lot of planning and should be used as more of a staple of our planning diet. Since curriculum changes, there's been a call for teaching mastery, which is not always possible, and although a really good idea in principle, is not always achievable. When we look at the content that needs covering in sub-subjects such as science, sometimes it's just too much. AQA have taken this whole idea into their own hands. They've developed their own Key Stage 3 curriculum, which is a really good place to start if that's where you want to build up from. And finally, one of the last things I used was the Big Ideas of Science by Win Harlan. It shows the links between the sciences while trying to keep each of them with their own identity. Students themselves have really quickly warmed to the fact that science is being chunked into more manageable ideas that are fed through from year 1 all the way through to year 11 and hopefully through to year 13 in the near future. Now, lots of schools that I've worked in focus on working backwards from what students need to be able to know for the final exams. We did something a little bit different where we focused more specifically at the first steps and building up from that point. What have students learnt before that we can use to help them better understand the topics moving forward? At our school, we have looked at how we can create stronger links during transition between year 6 and year 7 and beyond within the curriculum. We've got a head of curriculum development, Katie Russell, who's also been fundamental in ensuring that we are being consistent across subjects and across schools as well. I really wanted to focus on incorporating the big ideas of science to make sure there was a common thread between year groups, between the sciences and between the key stages. We've followed the colour scheme from the AQA scheme of work, so it could be picked by others and used as their scheme of learning from Key Stage 3. It'd be a really good start to building a model that could be used over a range of schools with similar assessments so that we can build a better database for grades and data prediction. It could also look at how we can use that to improve our own delivery in the classroom without paying money to join bigger institutions. Now, the main part of my talk will be around the steps involved in building your curriculum. Initially, bring together all of the documents that you need: national curriculum documents, specifications, PSHE, school expectation documents, and anything else that you feel will help you. Might seem a silly step, but is absolutely essential, ensuring that you make a really solid start on this. Now, as I've already mentioned, the national curriculum documents are hugely overlooked in planning. At Key Stage 3, we might not need to follow them, but use it as an additional planning tool. There are lots of resources out there, especially on Twitter, where people really want to share their expertise, and there's built up a great bank of amazing teaching resources. Following hashtags CogSciSci and hashtag Team Science, you will have things constantly popping up on your feed. As our school, we're focusing on the Key Stage 1 to 5 side of things. The documents I collated were schemes of learning and specifications with the exam boards that we were using. To start with first, we're going to focus on the Key Stage 1 and 2, and that's what the document that I started with as well, which was the national curriculum based around Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. Now, the next stage is to take that documentation and map out all of the key parts, and it's within a document that looks at the areas within your subject against the year group that it is covered in. So this is one of the quicker parts of the process and can be completed quickly to give a really good visual guide to what is covered and when it is covered and where you might be missing out particular pieces of your subject. Now, the national curriculum in Key Stages 1 and 2 is compulsory. Forces incorporates the type of forces, effects of forces, distance, speed and acceleration. Electromagnets covers domestic and circuit electricity, including static and electric fields, and magnetism, including transformers and electromagnets. Waves look at sound, light, the electromagnetic spectrum, and how waves are used in medicine and earthquakes. And finally, Earth is looking at the structure of the Earth, the solar system, and the wider universe. By taking apart the national curriculum and extracting these key topics, the statements can be plotted on a chart to see where students cover certain topics. Within electricity, for example, circuit electricity is covered in Year 4 and in Year 6. This will come in useful a little bit later on when planning to teach electricity in Year 7 and Year 9. Now, before looking at the advantages of looking at planning forward on a student's learning journey, there are certain aspects that are missed in the planning of working backwards. For example, students should be aware of basic components of circuit schematics, and that should have been practiced in Year 6. But every school I've been into has had a whole hour of reteaching circuit symbols, whereas actually we could use that as more of a start task or a bell task, because the students will already have an understanding of it, and it's just bringing that information to the front of their minds. The rest of the time could then be spent better on getting them to practice circuit building skills, for example, which will set them up better for GCSE and A-level. Now, using that information which was mapped out, I then looked individually at how each piece of the specification points in Key Stage 1 and 2 could be fed into Key Stage 3. I produced an overview document and ensured that the points were each mentioned into a long-term overview so that I knew that they would be covered in one format or another, and this is where this document was produced from. So the statements themselves, which are highlighted in yellow, are incorporated in the first stages of planning the Key Stage 3. Keeping with the electromagnetic electromagnates, electricity is broken up into resistance, voltage and current in Year 7, and we've looked at the knowledge that students need to take away from primary school before starting at secondary school and using that as our starting point. As students will be in a position where they should be able to do this, we can use this as more of a bell task, as mentioned before in the lesson, rather than using it as task 1 or using it as a whole lesson to get them to recall how to draw a bell or a bulb, for example, within a circuit. Once doing that, the next step is building medium-term plans, and these will look at what you want to cover within each of the lessons. Now, here is what our medium-term plan looks like. Now, the initial learning objectives were based on what students should have done at an earlier key stage, shown by the blue lines on the screen. And some of the points will be covered in other lessons where we as a team felt they fitted in a little bit better. So as these are fed through, it allows us to build a greater structure at the start of the lessons, and teachers themselves were more confident in what we need the students to be focusing on before introducing new knowledge in smaller steps, so it felt a little bit more coherent and separated. Since January, we've seen a huge amount of engagement with students that are really proud to show off what they already know on a topic. They now know that as part of their own our own planning, we are able to, or we're going to be looking for prior knowledge and the level of detail of which they understand it in. Use that Key Stage 3 document to benchmark what the students are going to need to know before they start in year 9 and 10 on their GCSEs. It'll also make it easier for you to look at giving the students a step between what they know already, what they need to be able to know, and then use that the challenge objective as something which you can get students to reach out for once they've met them objectives within the lessons, especially those students that do need to be pushed. Now, using the medium-term plans, the short-term plans can be written by breaking down what you want students to achieve and how you want your team to get there. Find the use of questions easier, which I'll talk about shortly in a little bit more detail. Now, this is how we've broken one of the lessons down from a medium-term plan into a short-term plan. Our Year 7 cohort is 360 students. We're going to have another 360 in September. We're also going to have 14 teachers delivering that content. So I want to ensure the best consistency possible, whilst understanding that a lot of teachers are going to have slightly different ways of working. I just want to make sure that these learning objectives are met one way or another. To make sure that the learning is taking place, then individual questions are going to be used to break down the learning objectives, and that is what we as a team will be looking for when doing book looks as a department, and when doing lesson observations. It's what I'm going to be looking for and asking the students what can they do. So if I went into a lesson after the students have been taught this, I should be able to get a student to draw 3 different circuit symbols and tell me the definition of current using the correct scientific terms. In the real world, not all students will be able to do this, and this is where we can use these questions for our recall starter in later lessons, further embedding that recall aspect of our learning within our scheme of work. As you get to the end of completing the short-term plans, a review will be needed of what has been completed so far. A lot of the time you'll be happy with the outcome, possibly more for the fact you never want to look at a specification or planning document again. I was very much like that and took a couple of months to trial the scheme of work with myself with my own classes, and found that I wasn't really happy with the outcome. So I went back to that review section to reflect again on what I liked and what needed to be updated. Upon the secondary review, I was not happy with the delivery of the recall tasks. When reflecting and evaluating, it was a case that I wanted a chunk of that lesson to be built upon recalling information on a more regular basis than what it currently was. Research shows that learning is more likely to happen if there is a gap between the students learning something and then having to recall it. Where there was a focus before on ensuring students were able to recall something from the lesson in a form of a plenary, we're trying to shift to do a plenary style task at the start of the next lesson. We try to look at the range of skills within the starter task and give the students about 8 minutes to answer the questions. We will then normally spend another 10 minutes going over the answers and talking through our own subject knowledge and understanding to model to the students what we would expect of an answer, with the students using a green pen to go over what they've written already. Key terminology, descriptions, analytical skills, data handling and recall are just some of the skills that we look at and are covered in this example starter. Now, although it feels completely unnatural to spend 20 minutes reviewing something, you need to remember that you are not spending an hour completely reteaching it. We'll then spend 20 minutes on a new material in smaller chunks. We'll finish off by building in questions with application to see if the students have got a grasp of how the new knowledge has been picked up and how they are able to apply it. Once the review has been completed, you can move to implement your scheme and move forward to the next key stage. I feel very fortunate in the situation we're in, as I've been able to go through the laborious task of writing the schemes of work, Key Stage 3 and Physics at Key Stage 4. The other teachers in my team have taken on Key Stage 4 Biology and Chemistry. In reality, for an entire Key Stage, set yourself a year to get to the point of implementing it. Moving on to the next Key Stage, nothing is done differently in the process. We use the documents made for Key Stage 3 to feed forward into our Key Stage 4. Our lessons are built upon the same principles of reviewing content regularly, opposed to reteaching content that will have been covered in earlier years. Using the appropriate specifications, we map out where students are meeting the criteria set out by the exam board. We're building further extension opportunities so that the students can be challenged, and it's an area that we as a department need to work on. All of the completed documents will be available as a link from Google Drive for you to use as your own scheme of learning if that is something that you'd like to do. Now, to make sure that learning is taking place, the individual questions are given to break down them learning objectives, and it will improve that consistency being given to students in such a large department. Looking at the 10 big ideas of science, within the schemes of work, we were able to see that there's a lot of threads that feed from Key Stage 1 through to A level. We wanted to use that to almost create a spiralling effect for a science curriculum, something that lots of places find really difficult to do. This is something I'd never focused on before, as I had the very naive thinking that whatever the book showed was what students didn't already know. But there is so much overlap between the key stages. A lot of teaching time can be saved by spending a little time focusing on what students would have looked at before they had you as their teacher. Unfortunately, this is something that is out of our control. It may be that a lot of students have covered the content, but some others were at a school where science was not a priority. Make sure that when you do the recall task that you go into enough detail that all students will be able to take the basics and apply the information from this in a later task. Using a spiral technique will allow the students to regularly review the content, but rushing at any point will increase the chances that you will incorrectly teach something that will be forever embedded in a student's memory. The next stage will be to get started at looking at the Key Stage 4 to Key Stage 5 transition, and again looking at the process. The first thing to be done will be to get all of the documents together and build from there. Data will be monitored to make sure that over time there is a noticeable impact on the students taking to the new order of things. For our school, the first time we'll be able to see what impact we have had in Key Stage 4 will be 2021. From the point on, there will be a review on Key Stage 4. In 2024, we'll have our first year 7 who have gone to year 11 students who have covered the whole of the scheme. So we'll be able to look at the impact of the Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 scheme of work. 2027 will be the first set of students that will show the impact of thinking about science from primary all the way through, and it's going to be very much a marathon rather than a sprint. At each point, we're going to reflect on the impact and see how we can change the schemes for the better. Is it that we need to better deliver a part of the scheme in year 10 where students have lost more marks on their assessment compared to the rest of the country, and it's about making the most of the data that you're given. The evaluation will take things out that don't add value to the work and add time to workload, and it will give us the opportunity to try something new and exciting. And then finally, a review using the data to show where the predictions were to where the students ended up. Was it good enough, or do we want to push better? How did we do as a department? How did we do compared to the rest of the school? Now, in all of this, as a middle leader, you'll be teaching a lot of lessons and have lots of other pressures. Your students will quickly pick up if you're not interested in what you're doing because your focus will be somewhere else. Get chunks of work done at a time and block it out on your timetable. For this, when we were in school before the lockdown, I had a day where I was teaching 2 lessons a day, and I used that day as my day for nothing but building curriculum. By Christmas, almost half of year 7 had been completed. There's so many people out there that are willing to help, and there may even be someone within your school that loves to do stuff like this, but again has never been asked. Build a network within the middle leaders and ask for people's opinions. The worst thing that is ever going to come from this is someone saying no. And finally, never forget to reflect on what you were doing. Setting the tone as a reflective practitioner will rub off onto your team. Talking about how a lesson went poorly and giving advice on how you'd do something differently if you were to teach it again sets the tone for others to feel comfortable enough to do the same. Some of the best advice you'll get on what you're doing will come from within your own team, especially because some of them will have a greater realm of experience than your own. Build confidence amongst each other and show to everyone what it means to be constructively critical about your own work, admit when you've gone wrong, and show passion when you get it right. A lot of the time, your team will look at you for direction in situations where you may not have the time nor the capacity to be able to provide it, but a small chat can go a huge way in getting your team to work for and with each other. I spent a lot of time demonstrating how to do things, modelling what I like to see. That has been tiring, it's been time consuming, but I've seen my team of teachers come together and support each other without me needing to say so, because they have been able to see that I am willing to get my hands dirty. Do not shy away from the tasks that are seen as menial, as people will quickly pick up on the vibe that you think they're not as important, and the expectations of your department will quickly decline. So please feel free to get in touch on Twitter or send me an email if you have any questions that you'd like to ask about with anything that's in this video. All of the documents that have been completed so far will be available as a downloadable zip file and are free to use with the inclusion of an attribution, or you can change them as long as you include an attribution and a link to the original documents.